Before the age of the Earth Tree and the Golden Order, there was a vast and glorious empire. An empire ruled by the ancient dragons and their dragon lord. An empire that had the Elden Ring and a god that was fled. A god not only connected to death, like many people think, but a god of dual opposite nature. A god representing both life and death, just like the sun itself. Be ready, because in this video I am going to change how you look at Elden Ring forever. The empire we are talking about was known as the Sun Realm, and it spanned the entirety of the lands between. There is a lot of evidence that prove that the Sun Realm was actually the empire of the ancient dragons. In order to find the first of those clues, we need to head to a place connected with the sun. A castle filled with sun imagery and dedicated entirely to the sun and the eclipse. Castle Sol in Latin, or Castle of the Sun in English. On top of Castle Sol, and specifically in the Commander Boss Arena, we can find a sigil. This sigil can only resemble one thing: the sigil of the sun. Up till now this is normal, but what's very interesting is the reappearance of the same sigil in Farum Azula. We can see the same sigil here on the bridge leading to the Bestial Sanctum. Not just that, but the sigil is all over Farum Azula itself. This isn't the only connection between Farum Azula and the sun. All over the lands between, we can find old soldiers of the Sun Realm. Their trademark is the usage of the Sun Realm shield, the only direct reference to the Sun Realm in Elden Ring. Not just that, but all of them are living in death. There is also a variation of those soldiers wearing great capes with a symbol of the sun on it. Those soldiers are all over the lands between, starting from Limgrave, Caelid, Altus Plateau, mountain tops of the Giants, and even the Shadowlands. This is a testament of the huge influence of the Sun Realm in its prime, an empire spanning over the entire lands between, which ties incredibly well with what we know about ancient dragons, that they ruled the lands between in the prehistoric era. Going back to Farum Azula, we can find beastmen who live in death, carrying the Sun Realm shield. Now those soldiers aren't the only remains of the Sun Realm scattered across the lands between. In matter of fact, there are other remains, literally. Along many regions of the lands between, we can find ruins that fell from the sky. Those ruins belong to Farum Azula. What's more interesting is that we can find something called sanctuary stones in those ruins. Those sanctuary stones are said to feed and strengthen the light as it shines. Those stones have inherent light in them, but not any light, the light of the sun itself. A fact proven by the items we can craft using those stones. We can craft warming stones. Those warming stones mimic the effect that the Earth Tree and the sun once had. Those sanctuary stones were used by the Empire of the Sun to store sunlight, just like the real-life solar panels. And again, back to Farum Azula, we can get those stones to drop from the beastmen. Now for the final nail to the coffin, the rock heart item we find in the DLC. We receive a ton of info about dragons and dragon communion from the DLC, but an often overlooked item is actually incredibly important for the entire story of Elden Ring. The rock heart item talks about dragon communion and its original form, way back in time, and it states that those partakers of dragon communion saw a remote thing from eternity. The last thing the partakers saw was human eyes with a sunset, its color faded and tarnished, a remote thing from eternity. We already know that the meaning behind the sun drained of color is an eclipse. The item is telling us that an eclipse happened way back in time when dragon communion was in its original form, and the dragons witnessed that eclipse with their own eyes, again connecting them to the sun and the eclipse. Naturally, the eclipse was a disaster to the Sun Realm, as it blocked their power source and even drained it of its color. But we will come back to this later on. Now we need to address the elephant in the room, who will tie all of this together. Who was the god of the Sun Realm? Over the past 2 years, we speculated heavily on the identity of the fled god of Placidusax, and in turn, the god of the Sun Realm. Judging by all manners of death found all over Faramazula, people went to the conclusion that it was the Gloam Eyed Queen. Today, I will show you something that you probably never saw before. We are told that Placidusax is waiting for the return of his god. While waiting, he assumes this pose. Before the DLC, people thought he was making the same pose of the two fingers. But after the DLC, we know that the spiral is a widely used symbol for contacting the gods. If we put the spiral symbol beside Placidusax, we notice that the top of the pose is different. The spiral is symmetrical at the top, while Placidusax's two heads aren't. One stands taller than the other. This may seem like nothing at first, but if we put the sword of the Gloam Eyed Queen beside Placidusax, things take a turn. We can see here that the spiral of the weapon ends in a shape identical to the bows of Placidusax. So it's true that the Gloam Eyed Queen was his god, but here is a catch. This is only half the truth, as the Sun Realm was not a realm of death, but a realm of life and death, just like the sun itself. The sun dies every day at sunset, only to be reborn at dawn. The ancient dragons themselves were actually immortal, and most importantly, Faramazula is filled with the illustrations of the twin bird. For the past 2 years, the twin birds have been a mystery, and most people attributed them to death. Again, this is only half the truth. The twin birds represent life and death. In order to understand this, we need to dive deep into the meaning of the symbol. We can see here the twin birds as illustrated on their kite shield. The left bird is black while the bird on the right is red. This symbol can be traced back to alchemy. It's no secret now that Elden Ring is heavily influenced by alchemy. The main character of the game is actually a divine rebase, a union of a man, woman, and a beast that controls the world. The main goal of alchemy is to perform the magnum opus, or the great work, which result in the divine rebase, a perfect dual being that can rule the world. The magnum opus can be illustrated in a lot of ways, but one of those ways involve using birds. The black crow representing death, and the red phoenix representing rebirth or life. We can see here the incredible similarity between all of those symbols, and judging by the main theme of the game, this indeed represents a rebus, a dual nature creature of life and death. The phoenix itself is incredibly important here, because the first people to mention the phoenix were ancient Egyptians. The phoenix was the bird of Ra, the sun god, and it was the main symbol in Heliopolis, the ancient Egyptian capital. Heliopolis was a name given to the capital by the Greek, and it means city of the sun. The phoenix itself represented the sun because, as I said, the sun dies every day at sunset only to be reborn at dawn. This is exactly what the twin birds in Faramazula represented, the cycle of life and death. It's all connected now. Faramazula is connected to the Sun Realm. It's also connected to the twin birds, which in turn represent the sun. Now it's only logical to assume that the god of the Sun Realm wasn't just a god of death, but a god of life and death, just like the twin birds and the sun itself. The god of death was the Gloam Eyed Queen, but who was the god of life? Someone whose rune was named the Rune of Life in version 1.0 of the game. Someone we know is a dual nature rebus. Someone whose children are connected to destined death and snakes. Yes, Marika. It was Marika and the Gloam Eyed Queen together. I believe the truth was in front of us this whole time. The truth was buried in Dominula Village. Dominula Village is one of the oldest mysteries in Elden Ring, but after the DLC it got way more interesting. We got a new item called the Festive Grease, which states that the festival is an old tradition, one old enough for the Earthtree to tacitly tolerate its endurance. But Marika isn't really known for her tolerance. Why did she tolerate that one? Especially that it's connected with her rival, the Gloam Eyed Queen. We can find a godskin apostle on top of the village. Not just that, but we learn that the entire festival is revolving around skinning. The maidens in blue wear capes bearing the symbol found on the seven-faced aprons of the godskin nobles. Those maidens are called harvesters, connecting them even more to death. But again, following the theme of this video, thinking that the festival is about death is only half the truth. All around the Munula village we can find the rune of Queen Marika, the rune called the Rune of Life. The maidens in blue aren't the only maidens in the village. We also got maidens in white. They wear capes bearing the symbol of the earth tree, and in the internal files, they are called gardeners, connecting them to life. If you analyze those maidens in white, you will reach a stunning realization. They are mimicking Marika herself. Their hairstyle is identical to Marika's, with a long braid on the back and the right side, and a cut braid on the left side. There is no way that this is a coincidence. We learned from the DLC that Marika's cut braid is of great importance. So why do we have maidens connected to Marika and life, while other maidens are connected to the Gloam Eyed Queen and death? They are recreating an ancient tradition, a tradition involving their dual nature god of life and death, a tradition involving Marika giving birth to demigods only for the Gloam Eyed Queen to kill and skin them. A fact I believe was celebrated on the seven-faced aprons of the godskin nobles, the most ancient of the apostles. The godskin noble robe is a very interesting piece of armor. It's iconic for the usage of real skin in making it, hence the name godskin. But if those robes are made of godskin, who did the nobles kill to make it? Upon further investigating the robe, we can find more clues. The robe features 7 faces around the same symbol that appeared in the Munula village. 7 is a very interesting number, a number bearing great significance in various religions. But if we search Elden Ring using 2 keywords, 7 and gods, we will find something of incredible importance: the 7 walking mausoleums. We were told that those mausoleums hold the soulless demigods, the unwanted children of Queen Marika. So is it a coincidence that we have 7 dead demigods and 7 faces are featured on the robe of the god killers? Before we answer this, we need to clear a misconception in the lore community. Many people believe that the walking mausoleums hold demigods killed during the Night of the Black Knives. This is far from the truth. This misconception emerged from connecting those soulless demigods to Godwin the Golden, therefore connecting their death to the Night of the Black Knives. But in matter of fact, Black Knives cannot produce a soulless demigod. That's not how Godwin ended up like this. The only reason Godwin the Golden is soulless is due to the fact that Ranni split the mark of death between both of them, killing her in body alone while killing Godwin in soul. So if those soulless demigods were the result of the Night of the Black Knives, who performed the other 7 rituals? Certainly not Ranni. Even the architecture of the mausoleums disproved this theory, because the mausoleums share the same architecture with the Eternal Cities. We know that the assassins behind the Night of the Black Knives were scions of the Eternal Cities. So why would the Golden Order collaborate with the Eternal Cities after they attacked their capital and killed their demigods? The DLC expands more on this subject by adding 3 coffins holding the remains of soulless demigods. Upon further investigation, we can find that the coffin's architecture differs greatly from the base game coffins. The DLC ones have what I call finger architecture. And indeed we find 2 of those coffins at Finger Ruins, and the 3rd can be found around Manos Mitir. But why do we find soulless demigods around the fingers? The fingers have always been very mysterious, and their motives are much more sinister than they look. You may think at first that they are connected to light, but this is only half the truth. Elden Ring is filled with a theme of duality, life and death, light and darkness. Especially after the DLC, it expanded so much on the concept of dual nature, and the fingers themselves are of dual nature, light and darkness. We got two variations of the two fingers prayer book. One is light and the other is darkness. The baleful shadows that haunt Rani are called the assassins of the two fingers. Interestingly, they use destined death. In matter of fact, fingers using the power of shadow to their advantage is even older than all of this. After the DLC and in the Shadowlands, we find sword hands of the night. Those sword hands are born and raised in a cold, dark jail deprived of light. Now what's really interesting is that their armor illustrates a fingerprint. A fact not just seen on the armor, but mentioned explicitly in the description. Those sword hands of night seems to have been created by the fingers, just like the assassins of the Round Table. So it seems the fingers have always used both light and darkness to their advantage. Now to the final nail to the coffin. The head of Meteor is very reminiscent of the Black Flame sigil. A logical thing, judging by the fact that the Gloam Eyed Queen was an Emberian chosen by the fingers. But they didn't just choose darkness, they chose both light and darkness. Light on top in the form of Marika, and in the darkness, there is a Gloam Eyed Queen to do their dirty work. Continuing on with the theme of light and darkness, there is something really interesting hidden in the Shadowlands. We can find in the Shadowlands a sword made of stone. This sword can change between light and darkness at certain altars. You may think that those swords are just a nod to King Arthur maybe, but in matter of fact, the stone-sheathed sword didn't first appear in the DLC, it was there all along. The sword monuments that we find all over the lands between are actually stone-sheathed swords, giving this sword a particular importance to the Golden Order, and indeed we can even trace those swords back to the fingers. In my opinion, the altars we find those swords at actually doesn't fit with their surroundings at all. They seem of different architecture altogether. Also, the places we find them at seems disconnected from each other. But if we compare the patterns of the altars to the walls at the finger ruins, we find some similarity. And don't forget that the sword hands of night are agents of the two fingers. All of this connects the swords of light and darkness to the fingers, but they are also connected to someone else, Mesmer. The three places we can find the swords at actually shares a common factor. They are incredibly hidden, like someone doesn't want you to find them. The altar at the Fog Rift Catacomb, for instance, is incredibly hidden that I completely missed on my first playthrough. Not just that, but do you know who is connected to that catacomb? Mesmer himself. At the catacomb, we can find the spirit ashes of Commander Andreas. It reads as follows. Used to summon the spirit of Andreas, Knight Commander of the Black Knights. The Black Knights were the primary force of Mesmer's army. Their first leader was Andreas, a man endued with great strength and command over the powers of the Crucible, and whose spirit in these ashes dwells. Though he remained a devout follower of Mesmer after his flight from the Erdtree, he would rebel after learning of his serpentine nature. His righteous stand was rewarded with imprisonment in an underground tomb. Of course, the underground tomb was none other than the Fog Rift Catacomb itself. So just like Mesmer imprisoned Andreas there, he also hid the altar there. This becomes even more obvious if you look at another altar location, the altar in the ruins of Ante. This entire area can be accessed only through the Shadow Keep, and it's incredibly hidden. Not just that, but the ruins entrance itself is blocked by one of Mesmer's war machines. You need to figure out how to actually wake that Wicker Man up and kill it before accessing the altar behind it, which again points at the fact that someone didn't want you to find those altars. The third location is at the ancient ruins of Ra, which again is blocked by the Shadow Keep. Someone wanted to hide the truth that those swords represented. This is no other than the common factor between all of these locations, Mesmer himself. Mesmer went to great effort to hide those swords from you, but why? I believe he was hiding the truth behind the old dual nature of his mother, the truth that those swords represent by changing back and forth between light and darkness, the primordial forms of gold and shadow. Now, after we talked about the duality between life and death and their connection to the fingers, it's easy to see now why the fingers would choose a god that can represent both, a dual nature god. But Marika didn't want this anymore. Remember the festival and the theme of gardeners representing Marika and harvesters representing the Gloam Eyed Queen? I think Marika didn't want her children to keep getting killed and skinned by her other half. We already know that dual-natured individuals have separate wills. We can even see this with Marika and Radagon. She shattered the ring while Radagon tried to fix it. I believe history repeats itself. Marika didn't want the festival to continue while the Gloam Eyed Queen was delighted. This pushed Marika to the brink and caused her to devise a plan. A plan to get rid of her other self, the Gloam Eyed Queen, forever. Not just that, but she wanted to remove the rune of death so she wouldn't lose any more children. And I believe that's why Marika was so broken after Godwin the Golden died. We are told that the death of Godwin was a catalyst to the shattering. The shattering was the breaking point of Marika, both metaphorically and literally. When we find her, she is literally broken. She broke because after all what she did to end the god hunt and remove the rune of death, she still lost her child. Now, how exactly did Marika end the previous cycle of the Sun Realm? How did she defeat her other self and get rid of the Gloam Eyed Queen? I believe she did that through an eclipse, but not a normal eclipse. She used the Earth Tree to eclipse the sun. My previous video and part 1 of this series was a video explaining how the Earth Tree stole the power of the sun and drained its color. If you didn't watch it, you need to check it after this video. But you may ask a question, why an eclipse? Remember the rock heart item? We already established that it connected the eclipse to the dragons. This isn't the only thing connected to eclipses. There is another, destined death. We are told through the eclipse great shield that the eclipsed sun, drained of color, is a protective star of soulless demigods. It aids the Mausoleum Knights by keeping destined death at bay. So what does the phrase keep destined death at bay means? I believe it means that during an eclipse, death is powerless. This is incredibly important. If destined death is powerless at an eclipse, that means that the Gloam Eyed Queen and her apostles are powerless. Let's watch this alternative cutscene of releasing the Rune of Death. Yes, this is an alternate cutscene which didn't make it to the final release of the game, but we can learn from it. The cutscene shows the Tarnished dying after merely touching the Rune of Death, which may give us some insight about what FromSoft had in mind for the Rune of Death. I watched this alternative cutscene long ago, and ever since I had a question in my mind. How exactly did Malicus manage to defeat the Gloam Eyed Queen? We aren't just talking about her army of apostles. We are also talking about possessing a power that can kill you with one touch. And I believe this is where the eclipse steps in. After Marika provoked the eclipse, the Gloam Eyed Queen was powerless, which allowed Maliketh to defeat her, split her from Marika, and kill her demigod children, the apostles, earning him the name Death of the Demigods. I believe there's a lot of evidence proving this theory, but there is only one flaw, the timeline. How does all of this connect with what we saw in the story trailer of Shadow of the Earth Tree? What was the relation between Marika, the Gloam Eyed Queen, and the Horn Scent? This would connect really well with what we see Marika doing at the Gate of Divinity. It's long been speculated that the thing Marika pulls the golden threads from is connected to the god skins. So is that where Marika discarded the Gloam Eyed Queen and used her remains to ascend to godhood once more? This time as a goddess of life with no death, as Queen Marika, the Eternal. One possible explanation for the timeline problem would be time convolution. We already know that time is really messed up in Faramazula. The biggest evidence regarding this is Malekith, an incredibly important person to the story of both Marika and the Gloam Eyed Queen. We know that Malekith is Gurranq, but if we kill Gurranq, Malekith doesn't die and vice versa. What's really interesting is that if you completed Gurranq's quest, he disappears and then he recognizes you as Malekith. Also, the ancient dragon smithing stone talks about its capability of twisting time. So did Marika use some kind of time manipulation powers? We still need to continue on to discover the full story of Marika, and we will do that over time, starting from the next year. Stay tuned, enjoy your holiday, and hit the like and subscribe button if you enjoyed, and tell me in the comment section what you think. Until next video, farewell, fellow tarnished.